Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are looking at something absolutely incredible. We're exploring an organization whose sheer scale has fundamentally shaped modern Indonesian society. We are talking about the lasting influence of Muhammadiyah. It's just fascinating to see how the ideas of one single person can ripple out across time and literally transform millions of lives. And that is exactly what we're going to map out today.
Because Muhammadiyah isn't just some historical footnote, right? It is one of the largest non-governmental Islamic organizations in the world today. We are talking about a vast, hyperactive network that manages thousands of schools, universities, modern hospitals, and charitable institutions. It's a sprawling ecosystem of social welfare. But it makes you wonder, how did it get to this point? How does any organization reach such a staggering global scale? Well, to understand that, we've got to go back to its roots. So, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at its foundation as a global powerhouse. Next, the spark of modernism. Then, we'll break down the 3 pillars of reform, and finally, its enduring national legacy.
All right, Section 1, a global powerhouse.
To truly grasp the scale of what we see today, we have to look at the initial problem. Individual efforts to change society, they usually hit a wall of resistance and just kind of fizzle out. A collective approach is absolutely crucial to create a lasting impact. And that is exactly why, on November 18, 1912, Muhammadiyah was officially founded by Kiai Haji Ahmad Dahlan. His highly ambitious goal was to completely transform education, healthcare, and social welfare in Indonesia. And Dahlan wasn't just anybody. He was a man of elite clerical lineage, a really high-ranking scholar who recognized that building a formal institution was literally the only way to safeguard and expand his reformist vision against the status quo.
Moving on to Section 2, the spark of modernism.
So, who was K.H. Ahmad Dahlan before he became this national icon? Fascinatingly, his story actually begins with a completely different name. He was born Muhammad Darwis in 1868 in the Kalman quarter of Yogyakarta. He grew up deeply steeped in religion, tracing his ancestry all the way back to the Wali Songo, the famous 9 saints who first introduced Islam to Java. But the real turning point on his timeline is 1883. At just 15 years old, he traveled to Mecca for the Hajj pilgrimage and stayed for 5 whole years. It was during this massive extended stay that he experienced a profound religious awakening, and he was given his new name, Ahmad Dahlan. He was so dedicated, he even returned for a second trip in 1903 to study under renowned scholars.
And let me tell you, those trips abroad were completely transformative. Dahlan didn't just sit around studying traditional texts. He connected with scholars from all over the Malay archipelago and fully immersed himself in a wave of Islamic modernism. He absorbed the ideas of prominent reformist thinkers, guys like Muhammad Abdu, Jamaluddin al-Afghani, Rashid Rida, and Ibn Taymiyyah. These thinkers championed the idea of reviving Islam by shedding outdated cultural baggage and actually engaging with the modern world. This became the intellectual fuel for his relentless drive back home. Armed with all these modernist ideas, Dahlan returned to Java with a very specific, sharply defined goal. He wanted to get back to the basics, the direct teachings of the Quran and Hadith. And to do this, he believed he had to purge local Islamic practices of 3 main things. First, takhayul, which are non-Islamic superstitions. Second, bid'ah, or unauthorized religious innovations. And third, shurafat, which are local myths. He saw these elements as diluting the true faith and essentially holding the whole community back from progress.
No, of course, challenging deeply entrenched traditions is never easy, right? Let's look at one of his most famous early clashes, the Qibla controversy. The Grand Mosque in Yogyakarta traditionally had its prayer lines facing due west, but Dahlan, who was utilizing precise astronomical calculations, known as ilmu falak, realized that to properly face the Kaaba in Mecca, they actually needed to pray facing northwest. So he tried to correct the direction of the prayer lines in his local prayer house, and oh boy, it sparked massive outrage among the traditionalist royal clerics.
The pushback was intense. Traditionalists labeled him a heretic and a westernized cleric. The anger boiled over to the point where an angry mob literally destroyed his small prayer hall. But here is what you really should take away from this. Dahlan's unyielding resilience. He didn't back down, no way. He wasn't intimidated by the mob. He simply rebuilt his prayer hall and continued preaching his mathematically and scripturally backed reforms.
Section 3, the 3 pillars of reform. Dahlan learned a hard lesson from that mob violence. Pushing back alone just wasn't enough. He needed a highly structured blueprint. Interestingly, he actually joined the organization Budi Utomo in 1909, specifically to gain modern management experience, before he even founded Muhammadiyah. Talk about thinking ahead. He translated that experience into 3 highly effective pillars that made complex societal change possible. He focused the organization's energy into 1. An educational revolution, 2. Teknologi al-Ma'on, which focused on social welfare, and 3. Women's empowerment through a branch called Aisyah. Let's break these down one by one because they completely changed the landscape of Indonesian society.
First up, the educational revolution. Before Dahlan, education in Indonesia was totally polarized. You either went to a strictly religious boarding school, a pesantren, or you went to a secular, Dutch-run colonial school. Dahlan created a revolutionary hybrid. He built schools that taught general scientific subjects right alongside Islamic theology. And what's kind of amusing today is that he introduced modern European classroom setups with desks, chairs, and blackboards. Believe it or not, traditionalists initially rejected this furniture, literally accusing him of copying Christians. But he pushed through, modernizing Islamic education forever.
The second pillar is Teologi al-Ma'on. This is the core belief that faith cannot just be theoretical, it must manifest in concrete social action. There is this famous anecdote where Dahlan taught Surah al-Ma'on, the 107th chapter of the Quran, which warns against neglecting orphans and the needy. He taught this single chapter over and over and over again. When his students finally asked why he wouldn't just move on to the next chapter, he asked them if they'd actually practiced it yet. He refused to stop teaching it until his students actively went out into the streets to help the destitute.
And that direct faith in action theology yielded incredible, lasting results. This wasn't just a one-time charity drive. It directly resulted in the creation of permanent institutions. We're talking free public clinics, which later became known as PKU Muhammadiyah, alongside large-scale hospitals, orphanages, and highly organized food distribution networks. He essentially institutionalized charity so that it could operate effectively at scale.
The third pillar was absolutely groundbreaking for its time: women's empowerment. In 1917, Dahlan, alongside his wife Siti Walida, established Aisyah. This was a dedicated women's branch of Muhammadiyah. Now put this into the context of colonial Java. This was a profoundly revolutionary step. It provided women with unprecedented access to education, opportunities for real religious leadership, and a huge platform for public social work. Siti Walida herself was later named a national hero for these pioneering efforts.
And finally, Section 4, an enduring national legacy.
In his later years, Dahlan relentlessly traveled across Java, constantly moving to establish new schools, orphanages, and regional chapters of Muhammadiyah. This tireless dedication really took a heavy toll on his health, and he passed away on February 23, 1923, at the relatively young age of 54. He was buried in Yogyakarta, but his impact, it only continued to grow. Recognizing his monumental contributions to the fabric of the nation, President Sukarno officially bestowed upon him the title of National Hero of Indonesia in 1961. The small organization he started just to fix his local community had blossomed into a true pillar of the nation.
Which leaves us with a pretty powerful final thought. Dahlan's legacy wasn't just about building schools or hospitals. It was about the fundamental idea of faith in action. He looked at his core beliefs and built real-world systems to make them tangible. So I want to leave you with this. How can your own faith or your deepest core beliefs manifest in concrete social action today? How can you move from belief to real impact? Think about that for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope it sparked your curiosity to go out and learn even more.